Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, for the Staffing and Appeals Committee. Can I ask everyone, please, who's present to turn their mobile phones to silent or vibrate while the meeting's taking place? And note that there's no fire alarm scheduled for today. So if an alarm sounds, we'll adjourn the meeting and make our way downstairs out of the main entrance and turn left. The muster point is at the far end of the building. So apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies?
We do. Apologies from Councillor Kevin Rells and Councillor Matt Maguire is substituting. Apologies from Neil Shaler and Councillor Miskini is substituting. Apologies from Councillor Tierney, Councillor Ambrose Smith is substituting, and apologies from Councillor Billington.
Thank you very much. Does any member wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest? No. Thank you very much. We're being asked to approve the minutes of the meeting on the 1st and 5th of December as a correct record. Can I ask any member who does not agree with this proposal, please raise their hand? I see no hands, so we approve the minutes as a correct record. So first item of the agenda, please. Can I ask the Workforce Strategy and Policy Manager to introduce the report on Senior Manager Paid Data and the Pay Policy Statement?
Excellent. Thank you very much, Chairman. As Councillor Murphy said, my name is Lindsay Fulcher. I'm the Council's Workforce Strategy and Policy Manager. And the first report I've got for you today is the Senior Manager Pay Data and Pay Policy Statement. This is an annual report that I bring to Staffing and Appeals Committee once a year. There are a number of things that we are required to publish under the Localism Act 2011. And you'll see in section 2.1 of the report the items that we are required to publish. Moving to section 3 is the start of these data requirements. The first being the tiers 1 to 3 of the organisation. Those are the individuals that occupy any post that's in the 1st to the 3rd tier. And within that, we need to publish the names and the salary of those individuals that earn over £150,000 in the year. So you'll see from section 3.2 of the report, we're reporting 4 individuals this year. That is our Chief Executive, Stephen Moyer, Rachel Stoppard, who's the Chief Executive of the Greater Cambridge Partnership, Charlotte Black, who at the time of reporting was the Executive Director of People Services and has subsequently left the organisation, and Stephen Cox, the Executive Director of Place and Sustainability. And the information in the report contains their salary details. The accompanying data sheets that come with this report also has that details, and these is what we will publish on the County Council's website as well. The next thing we're required to report on is the number of posts that are in those top 3 tiers of the organisation, with the first tier being the Chief Executive. We had 38 posts in those top 3 tiers this year, and this compares to 35 last year. Of the 38 posts, we have 18 that are shared and part funded with partners, for example, some of the Greater Cambridgeshire Partnership roles, and also some roles shared with Peterborough City Council. We have 4 individuals who we report on in this report because they sit in those 3 tiers, but they're actually employed by Peterborough City Council. The next thing that we report on is in section 3.4, and that's those individuals that earn over £50,000 within the year. So this report looks at the annual salary over a 12-month period of people that earn over that £50,000. Now that considers the total remuneration of these individuals. So it's not just their basic salary. So you will notice from the data sheet, the accompanying information, that there are quite a few individuals on there who don't earn a base salary of £50,000, but because of overtime, they may have multiple roles, or they may have had enhancements applied to their roles, and therefore it takes them above that 50,000. We're still required to report on those, but we make it really clear on the report, so it's clear and transparent. You can see what's being reported. Another thing to note is that figure does increase year on year. So we've got 199 officers this year, which is an increase of 22 from last year. Now, the reason being is obviously our salaries attract an annual cost of living increase, but that £50,000 threshold has not changed for some years now. So every year our salaries will increase, and we expect to see that figure increasing. That explains why there's always more people within that category every year. The next thing I wanted to highlight was the pay ratio. The pay ratio is the difference between the median salary, so that's the middle salary, the employee that sits at the middle salary, the salary range for them, the difference between that role and the highest paid role in our structure, which is our chief executive salary. So the pay ratio looks at the difference in that. Our current ratio is 1 to 6. And as I've said to committee before, the Hutton review of fair pay back in 2011 brought about the introduction of the pay ratio as the multiple that we need to calculate. And whilst there isn't a target or isn't an upper limit enforced, the Hutton report did outline that an organisation shouldn't go, or a local authority shouldn't go above a ratio of 1 to 20. When you calculate the 1 to 20 in terms of our organisation, looking at our median, it would mean that our top salary would need to reach just over £500,000 to get to that 1 to 20. So it's not something that we would ever expect to be near. So what we do is I bring to committee every year, I bring you a comparison year on year as to where we've been with that ratio, so we can track and make sure that we're not deviating from our norm. We have the median and the mean salary outlined in section 3.8 of the report. And you'll see that we've had an increase in our median of just under £3,000. That's £2,875 from last year. And again, an increase of just over £2,500 for our mean. For the vast majority of our workforce last year, there was a pay increase which was settled at £1,925 per employee. That was the rate settled for the NJC pay scale, which encompasses just over 60% of our workforce, with a similar figure being given, or the same figure being given, to the other pay scales. So that's relevant to the increase that you'll see in those mean and medians. One thing I just wanted to point out to you is the structure charts. That's another thing that we're required to publish. Our organisation at the moment is experiencing quite a lot of change. The structure charts are, we appreciate that they will be out of date by the time we publish them, and in fact there will be some changes that are not reflected in them today. So I would like committee to consider that when putting forward the recommendation to present this to full council. And what I can give you the assurance of is that we will update those structure charts the day that we publish them onto CAMWeb, which will be at the end of March, and we'll make sure that they are up to date as of that date and then maintained going forward. And the last thing that I'd like to highlight to you is the section 4 is the Chief Officer Pay Policy Statement. This is the pay policy statement that is relevant to those chief officers and the statutory officers that we have within the organisation. It outlines the pay principles that apply to this pay scale and those individuals. The only significant changes that have been made to that from this year in comparison to last year is obviously we've updated the figures within there in terms of the mean and median and the ratios, but we've also reflected the fact that we've got a new leadership pay scale. So the report outlines, and the pay policy statement references that and outlines how pay is determined within that framework. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a very rich picture. Are there any comments or questions? No? Oh, Lucy.
Just very briefly, for the benefit of the public, it's worth saying that we've done a 2-hour workshop on this shortly beforehand. So actually, for many of us, there's been quite a long discussion about some of this. And I feel very well informed about it, but I don't necessarily feel the need to have the same discussion all over again. So thank you very much, Lindsay.
Thank you. Lisa.
No, thank you very much. And I just wanted similarly to say that this is in the wrong place. Hang on. This was very well presented, and I've had an opportunity to have a look at quite a lot of these things, which I think it was very good of you to come with as much data as that. It was very good of you to come with as many answers as you did. And hopefully going forward, as I've said in the meeting before, this is the only thing I'll repeat, it would be very useful for us to see progress and movement, not just how it is right now, to aid our memories, but also to show that we're actually achieving the direction we want to achieve. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of comments that might be helpful, conscious this is public part of the meeting. Lindsay mentioned the Will Hutton review of pay and pay ratios in 2011. Members may not be aware, but I actually contributed to that when I was part of Cambridgeshire County Council in my previous role. So a great deal of the principles that Will Hutton sets out are ones that we were already trying to take forward in the county at that time. We were actually in partnership with the Work Foundation, where Will was at the time Chief Executive, undertaking some research work on the future of work more broadly, which is information and lessons we've followed through since then. So it was just to endorse the comments Lindsay's made in reference to that and pay gap reporting. And then secondly, Chair, I think it was just to reflect on the fact that, yes, we have reviewed our leadership pay scales for certain posts during the course of this year. That's because, based on benchmarking, this council was out of kilter with not just our neighbours, but actually with the recruitment market generally for some of our most senior roles. I hasten to add that's enabled us to make a number of appointments that were covered in the minutes earlier in the meeting. All 4 of those posts have been successfully filled, and people will take up role during March of this year, and they are all critical roles, including 2 of our key statutory officers, one for finance and one for monitoring officer purposes. So helpful to just reference that. Chair, the final thing that I just wanted to comment upon, because I recognise this is about senior pay, I think we would all recognise, and I know members absolutely do, the importance of pay for our staff that deliver frontline services, which is why we continue to contribute to the National Joint Council arrangements for pay bargaining, unlike a number of other councils, both within this county and beyond, who've opted out of those arrangements. And really importantly, we continue to have a commitment to ensure that our staff have real and fair pay in place, which is why we use an objective system of job evaluation to ensure that equal pay considerations are built into our pay structures. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for those comments. Lucy.
Just a very, very quick follow-up to what Stephen was saying about the national pay situation and pay for our staff. And I think it is worth saying that given the stressful situation that many public sector areas are in, we in local government have been very lucky that actually the flat cash settlement that was agreed seems to have been quite willingly accepted. And we are aware that that is not something that can be continued in the very long term, because it has an implication. It has all sorts of complex implications on the differences between grades. But as a short-term help for those who are most likely to be suffering from the cost of living crisis, it was very helpful. And I would also like to put on record publicly our thanks to the senior staff for taking the same flat cash settlement, which is a good mechanism for all of us, I think. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I would endorse those comments, and also add, if there are no other comments, that the work going on around the pay gap isn't just about reporting. It also informs approaches to supporting staff in a number of different ways, and increasing the diversity of our workforce, which will improve our services as well. So it is really important important metric, but it's not isolated. It is part of a continuous improvement exercise. So thank you very much, and noted that the structure charts will be updated. Thank you very much. Is everyone happy to support this paper? Thank you very much, and thank you very much for, it was very well put together. Thank you. So would you like to introduce the pay gap reporting?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so another one of our annual reporting requirements, and something which is very important, as we've heard, in terms of the workforce, and that's our gender and our ethnicity pay gap. So our gender pay gap requirements for reporting are statutory. The ethnicity pay gap requirements have come from a council motion back in July 2021. A motion was taken for us to start reporting on our ethnicity pay. I would just like to caveat that with the fact that this is not a statutory reporting requirement, and therefore there are no guidelines in terms of how we should report on our ethnicity and in which ways. So we undertake a very similar exercise to that with the gender pay. We use a similar calculation method, and therefore that may change going forward. Should ethnicity pay gap reporting become a legal requirement, there'll be much more guidance around that. So the figures that you have in front of you today hopefully provide a guide, but please note going forward they may well change if that becomes legislative. So looking at our gender pay gap, you have the report and then you have a copy of the publication. We are required to publish at the end of March each year. I would just like to highlight to you that whilst we publish at the end of March, the snapshot data that the legislation requires us to use is the end of March of the previous year. And therefore, we are always in effect reporting on data which is a year old. So all of the actions and all of the hard work that's done over the course of the past 12 months will not be reflected in these figures. And that's one of the reasons why we come to you as committee at alternative times of the year and provide you with some updates. Looking at the gender pay gap specifically and the mean and the median calculations, it's really pleasing to note this year we're reporting a mean gender pay gap of 8.8% against a 9.6% figure last year. And then the median gender pay gap this year is 8.2 against a percentage of 8.6 last year. Small but significant changes, and it's really pleasing. Whilst a pay gap is not something that an organisation obviously strives to, we're always looking to reduce our gender pay gap. To see a decrease in a pay gap like this is really significant and really goes to show the work that's being done to reduce it. It takes a very long time to make an impact on pay in an organisation as diverse and as large as ours. So that's a really pleasing reduction. Looking at the ethnicity pay gap, we have seen an increase in both the mean and the median this year. So this year we're reporting a mean of 3.1%, which has increased from 2.5% last year, and the median ethnicity pay gap has increased from a minus 2.9% last year to 6.2% this year. We've done some analysis to look into this. We did expect this to increase, and the reason being is our data returns on our diversity data has historically been relatively low. We've only ever known approximately 3/4 of the organisation's diversity information. We have had a massive campaign rolling over the course of the last 18 months or so to try and encourage our workforce to complete their diversity data on our ERP HR system. And it's interesting when you look at the more detailed analysis of these figures, and I've got this on the publication that you'll see in the appendix, and you can see that we've got nearly double the amount of people in the categories reporting as from non-white ethnicities. As you can see, we report on white and then non-white in the same way we do with the gender in terms of the male and the female. And we've got nearly double the amount of people. So people internally, our colleagues have been completing that data. But when you look at the return rate of the complete data we've got in terms of diversity, that's reduced. So that to me says that we've been very successful in having our colleagues complete their ethnicity data, but we're perhaps not capturing it for those new starters that started with us. So we've done some further analysis, we're doing some further work on that, and you'll see some of the actions in the action plan that accompanies the gender pay gap publication to talk around making sure that we link up our recruitment processes with our ERP system, making sure that we're capturing that data. And we've since the snapshot date for this, we've had a new recruitment system in place, so that will definitely help with some of that as well. So we can't just look at the figures in isolation. We need to understand the information behind it. So the last section for me, the progress against actions. What I've done this year is rather than just report in the public publication, the publication in the appendix is the one that will go onto our internet site, will be available for everybody to see. Rather than just put the actions that we're looking to take over the next 12 months, I've put a summary there of the things that we've done over the past 12 months to give some of that context and hopefully people can understand how we've managed to reduce our pay gap over the course of the last 12 months. That's all I had. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Thank you. Any questions? Again, this is something which was the subject of a workshop earlier, and we delved into the data and how the whole thing is constructed, which is very helpful. Elisa.
I'll just say thank you very much for this. And it was actually, I'm very pleased that we are leading the way in terms of ethnicity pay gap reporting. I mean, if it comes in, it will be very good of us to say, actually, we've got plenty of data and plenty of experience already, and that, those things are useful. It doesn't surprise me that the first few times you take data that there will be a bit of, and I would really I encourage everyone to actually to keep us up to date in how we are ensuring that we've got as good reporting for that kind of data as we've got for everything else. I wouldn't expect us to struggle to be able to know how many people are saying that they are, their age or their gender. We wouldn't want the ethnicity to be more difficult to record. So hopefully that will progress. And I am very, very pleased that it is. I'm very, very pleased that we're building a foundation on which to stand. And I do hope, as I said, that we will see good progress going forward in terms of how these figures map out over the next few years. So thank you very much for all of that and all the discussion that has happened previously. I'm very, very happy with everything. Thank you.
Thank you. Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Couple of comments from me. First of all, whilst it's pleasing to see the gender pay gap reduce, as in the gaps closed slightly compared to last year, obviously I think we recognise as officers there's more work to do. On the ethnicity pay gap, I would just make the point to members that it is an area we're working with our ideal network of colleagues upon to try and improve reporting and people's wish to disclose their ethnicity as part of the Council's ERP system. One of the challenges we have with any of the 9 protected characteristics arising from the Equality Act 2010, of course, is it's a matter of personal choice and self-classification. So we are trying to ensure that people understand that choosing to classify and share their ethnicity data is actually helpful to the council, and it's purely for that reason that we're asking them to do so rather than any other reason. Of course, that would not enable individuals to be identified, and the way the data is managed means that even small teams would not be identifiable. So we're trying to use that as a positive means to encourage more people to disclose their information, both people employed by the council and those as they join the council. But from experience, Chair, this is a challenge I've seen in many other public sector organisations and frankly many private organisations, so it's one we'll continue to work at, but it's very helpful to have a group of colleagues from across the organisation through our ideal network to try and support us on that journey. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lucy.
Sorry, David. Just a very, very quick comment to say that as part of our discussion, which was quite in depth on this earlier on, we spent quite a lot of time talking about the fact that one of the reasons why this council has quite a high gender pay gap is because we have a very large number of female workforce members who are on relatively low salaries. While there are lots of ways in which we would like to change that and increase their salaries, also another part of it is about trying to encourage more men to come into care work, which actually is a really important thing, not just because it helps improve our gender pay gap, but actually because there's a real need for more diversity in the caring workforce, because any workforce which is more diverse is better. So if anyone's listening, which seems a little bit unlikely, and is looking for a job, there are lots of roles for men in care work. Thank you.
Thank you for a point very well made. David.
Thank you. It's some education for me, please. We're recommendation is this goes to the March council meeting for approval. Should it not be just for noting, because all the facts and figures are there, rather than approval?
Well, I defer to
I think it reflects the statutory requirement that we have to do that, which is why we're basically approving that it be published, more than actually Yeah. Yeah, I think that's what the facts are the facts, aren't they? It's the approval that it be actually published. Yeah.
Thank you. No, it's important always to be clear about our role. Stephen.
Chair, just to agree entirely with Michelle's point, this is about approval by council to publish rather than query the data in effect. It's one of the requirements of the Local Government Transparency Code of 2015 and the associated provisions. So the approval is to publish, not to, in effect, amend the content of the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments or points about this, questions about this paper? Oh, it's really excellent paper. Thank you very much. Are we happy to support it? Yes, indeed. Thank you very much indeed. So the next item is the role of this committee in the appointment of the council's leadership team, looking at particular roles. Can I ask the Chief Executive, please, to introduce this report?
Thank you, Chair. I'm hoping for members' benefit and indeed for anybody that reads the paper that's published, it's relatively self-explanatory. We have a number of senior roles that members are involved in final appointment decisions for, and as part of our current structural arrangements, that includes what might best be described as a mixture of roles. Some of them are the key statutory roles, including myself and the executive directors, or other key roles such as the monitoring officer who doesn't report directly to me, or indeed the service director education, who is also our chief education officer. Those are absolutely all critical roles that members need to be involved with, and indeed full council needs to ratify the appointment of head of paid service, section 151 officer and monitoring officer. Those all remain reserved matters for council. However, because we have this current structural arrangement where we have various roles of executive directors, service directors and assistant directors, and there are varying levels of assistant director roles as well, we find ourselves sometimes in the situation that we're not agile enough as an organisation in being able to recruit to these roles, and that's with no disrespect to members of the committee, but a committee process does sometimes lengthen the necessary appointments required. So the proposal set out, Chair, in the paper is to actually streamline the definitions of the posts that Staffing and Appeals Committee would be directly involved in appointing in line with our statutory and constitutional requirements, but importantly, improving our agility to recruit for certain roles that would ordinarily have come to Staffing and Appeals Committee in the past. I've quoted an example in here for a service director role that might sit, say, in children's education and families, and recognising the labour market conditions for those types of senior appointments. Where we have a suitable qualified candidate, we sometimes need to move faster than our democratic processes enable us to do to make an appointment. So that's really the intent behind the paper, Chair. The other point I would make is it does create a bit of an anomaly if we wanted to change some of our job titles to streamline the organisational structure. So, for example, if I can use my colleague to the left, and she'll hopefully not hit me when I do so, Janet's role is currently titled Assistant Director of Human Resources, and she reports to one of the council's executive directors. So her role is a third tier position in our management structure. Looking at the title relative to other organisations that Janet holds, her peers across most of the rest of the region and indeed other bodies would be Director of Human Resources. If we wanted to adjust and reflect the title without having to adjust the pay, that would mean that post would then require Staffing and Appeals Committee approval to appoint in the future. So you can see there's something around how we streamline job titles without increasing the workload of Staffing and Appeals, and at the same time being able to respond to market conditions for certain roles in a more agile way. So, Chair, this is really proposing a streamlining of that, making sure the committee absolutely retains authority for appointment to all the key positions, particularly the statutory roles. But we're just trying to reflect upon both of those issues and hopefully move forward in a more effective and market responsive way. But I'm happy to take questions and comments from members. Thank you, Chair.
Questions or comments? Henry.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm sure this was probably covered in the workshops that I didn't attend, unfortunately, but if you could indulge me. So just so I'm clear, is this essentially bringing us in line with how other local authorities operate, or is this something unique to Cambridgeshire?
Chair, it's a very good question from Councillor Batchelor. I think this is where we get into the situation that almost every local authority does it slightly differently. There is a degree of consistency, it would be fair to say, but depending on the size and nature of the authority, you would probably find, for example, in some of our district councils, that the approvals level or member involvement in appointments might go further into the organisational structure, whereas for our neighbours in county councils, generally the approval levels would be at this type of involvement. So it does vary from council to council, it's fair to say. I have had experience of a local authority where actually members were only involved in 3 statutory appointments, which is not something I would advocate to you. And that was the head of paid service, chief exec, the 151 officer for finance and the monitoring officer. I actually think that we have really important statutory roles around children's adult social care and public health that all require member involvement as well. So I'm afraid it's not about being entirely consistent with others, but it's more reflective of what upper tier councils like ourselves do. Thank you.
Lucy.
Thank you. I do understand the reasons why this is coming forward, but I think it might also be helpful to reassure the committee that just because an appointment is not made by the Staffing and Appeals Committee doesn't mean members would not be involved in the appointment, because there are quite a number of ways in which members can be involved.
Chair, yes, happy to respond to that question from the leader. And as members will be aware, we do involve them in different stages of the recruitment process for some of our most senior roles. And that includes, for example, stakeholder panels as part of an assessment centre. So if I think about some of the roles that might not in future be a Staffing and Appeals Committee appointment, if members were to agree these proposals and subsequently went on through constitutional changes, we would still definitely want member involvement in the selection of our Director of Children's Social Care as a good example, and that would be beneath the Executive Director and statutory role, but we could include member involvement through the stakeholder panel, and that's actually a more effective process in my view, and probably gives members a more appropriate level of engagement with candidates at the right stage, because at final interview, if members will forgive me, that's a bit more artificial as a process. So this is a more active way of engaging you through the selection for key roles rather than having to have a formal committee meeting. Thank you.
Lucy.
And I think that the Director of Children's Social Care is actually quite an interesting example in that that's an absolutely key role. But it is not inappropriate for the person who would be managing that person to be part of the final interview and do really testing interviews on competence in the specific areas which members are likely to know less about. On the other hand, it is still important for us to be involved in the process and to be able to give some feedback. So that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Elisa.
Sorry, just a very quick question. So first of all, yes, I understand why this has come forward and I'm quite happy to support it. In fact, I will run the risk of embarrassing myself by saying this is how I thought it worked. But I'm not a regular member of this committee, so, you know, it's at the same time, I think actually would help if there was a bit more clarity around what kind of involvement we want from members and when, because it is true, the formal appointment day is quite a formal, you know, and it would be useful, especially from the public perspective, who might very legitimately want to know how we recruit these people and who is involved and how, whether, you know, an explanation in plain English would be quite useful. A slightly silly question. Why is the Service Director of Education not in the second bullet point? So that's 2.3 I'm talking about.
Right. Chair, thank you to Councillor Machini in terms of the question. So the second bullet point relates only to executive directors, so the people that report directly to me. So in that case, the senior officer concerned is the executive director for children, education and families, whom the Service Director of Education then reports to Tier 3. So Jonathan Lewis is our Service Director of Education. Jonathan reports to Elaine Redding as our Executive Director of Children's Services, which is actually more akin to the statutory requirements from 2004. Previously, Jonathan reported to Charlotte Black as our Shared Executive Director of People Services, rather than to me.
So I do apologize, it's just so I can understand. So basically we have Elaine, to whom John reports, and to whom also the Director of Children's Social Care reports or will report. One of those two will remain the prerogative of this committee to recruit, whereas the Director of Children's Social Care won't. Why?
So just to clarify, again, that comes back to the statutory nature of the roles. So if members will forgive me for using names, because it's perhaps easier for us by way of discussion, the Executive Director role held by Elaine Redding as an interim at present is the Statutory Director of Children's Services, which has responsibility for children's social care and education. Beneath that, we have the Service Director Education held by Jonathan Lewis, which is the Statutory Chief Education Officer, whereas the Director or Assistant Director, as it's currently titled, Assistant Director of Children's Social Care, that also reports into Elaine, is a non-statutory role. It's Elaine holds the statutory remit. The person that's leading the teams on a more operational basis isn't a statutory appointee. Hopefully that helps clarify.
Thank you. That's Stephen.
Chair, actually, just reflecting on some of the comments from members already, I wonder if what might be helpful is to make an adjustment to the recommendations, mindful that if you approve this today, it still has to go to Constitution and Ethics and ultimately on to full council. We can add an additional paragraph in expanding the clarification around role of members and appointing some of the role of members in the assessment processes for some of the non-statutory roles, so that we can include that as part of the explanation. I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do and would probably help if you were to approve the paper today and explaining it elsewhere. I think that would be a sensible addition to the paper. The other point I would maybe make, and it's at this point my HR colleagues might look at me, we may want to look at our, whether we have one or not, we may want to look at our chief officer appointments policy, which would probably be the place we'd document some of this in more detail. So that would allow us to reflect these changes, if approved, in the policy document, so it's clear in terms of member involvement for each and every one of the jobs. I know that's a level below this discussion, but it's a good way of codifying what we're effectively discussing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think it's really helpful, and it's I think our view is that this is quite a balanced proposal, because it isn't just looking at the bare minimum for this committee, but it is trying to identify where this committee has what the principle is of this committee's involvement, but also beyond that, what defining a bit more carefully, as Elisa and you have suggested, defining a bit more clearly what is expected, or what members' involvement in the assessment process could be, and for what level or what type of appointment being considered. So thank you. I think, Mac.
Thank you, Chair. I just want, I accept what Stephen is saying, and I think it makes common sense to me, but I think, picking up from Councillor Machini's point, between and our role between the statutory and the non-statutory, I think it would be if somewhere, and I don't know where it be in the paper that goes to Constitution and Ethics, that is clarified so that members have a greater understanding. And I'm not sure if your amendment or the addition you're proposing can include that somehow, because it's quite clear that it can be a wee bit confusing at times as to what our role, when we're going to get involved, when we're not going to get involved. I appreciate and I certainly think it's sensible, like at the stakeholder level, if you're appointing social services, to have member involvement. But I don't think, I'm trying to remember for Constitution Ethics whether it's that clear. So if somebody wants to have a look at that and decide whether it needs clarification before it goes to Constitution Ethics and subsequently Council, and I think it would make sense.
So my understanding is it's tier 1 and tier 2 is this committee, and tier 3 any statutory officers. Is that it?
That's
Okay.
a very good summary, Chair.
Perhaps to make that really clear that that's the principle, and in the paper, I think it would help a lot, as Councillor Maguire has pointed out. Given what we said, is everyone happy to support the paper, including the comments for perhaps adding to it? Yep. Thank you very much indeed. So that's going to go to the Constitution and Ethics Committee. So thank you very much. The final item on the agenda is an update on HR services. So can I ask Janet, please, to introduce this report?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so the last report, as Councillor Murphy's just explained, is an update, a summary really of some of our workforce activity over the last 12 months. And the purpose of this is to give you an overview of the snapshot of our workforce profile as of this month, and just to sort of paint a picture really of some of the people related challenges across the organisation, which we have been tackling in the last 12 months, which you won't be surprised to know are largely around recruitment and retention, and a summary of the work that we've been doing and plan to do to address those challenges. There's a lot of information in here and I won't go through all of it because, it's something for you to take away and read. But I'll just, if I may, just draw out some of the sort of main points and the highlights. So under section 3, we've set out that, there has been quite a significant amount of structural changes across the council in the last 12 months and continue to be so. So one of the key focuses of the team has been around supporting people through change management. As you're well aware, we've had a review of the corporate leadership team, and we're in the midst at the moment of consulting on proposals to separate people services from Peterborough City Council. So there's a lot of change underway that is having an impact across the organisation, but we're working hard to support people and move the organisation forward in a really positive way. Underpinning all of that, you'll see in section 4, around the resourcing activity, we have created, increased the recruitment and retention team that support the council. We've now grown that to 10 people. That's an increase of, I think, about 3 over the year. And that's been not by additional funding, but by restructuring the wider team to look at where we can divert resources to where we most need it. As I mentioned just briefly before, recruitment and indeed retention is probably the biggest challenge for us, and we felt that we needed more support in this area. So we have, in the last 12 months, created a new e-recruitment system, and we now have what's called a recruitment hub, which is helping us have an increased reach into the employment market through the ability to post vacancies across a much wider number of sites and increase the number of candidates. And we are seeing a much greater response to our adverts and our recruitment processes already as a response to that, which is really positive. Equally as important, if not more so, we're getting feedback to say that the candidate experience is much more positive, and that was something that was a key sort of driver for replacing the system that we had. We've also introduced exit interviews more consistently across the organisation. I think prior to the last 6 months, we were doing that very in a focused way within social care, but we're now offering exit interviews across the whole organisation. We've always done exit questionnaires for everyone who leaves, but we are doing now we're more directly targeting people who we are notified are leaving and inviting them to have an exit interview, which is starting to give us some more useful insights into why people might be leaving, and that's something that going forward we'll be able to build into these reports as we start to get some meaningful data. We're also offering stay interviews, which is focused around people who have been with us for 6 months. So we're trying to understand how people's experience has been when they've joined us, how their onboarding was, what the induction was like, whether they've felt welcome into the organisation, so on. So we now we survey people after 6 months, and then we do set up conversations with them to make sure they're happy and settling well into the organisation, but also to, as part of our continuous improvement, really to see what we could do better. So that's been a positive addition. Employee engagement, we've set out a lot of the activity that we've been undertaking in section 5, and I think it's fair to say this is something that we are having to work harder and harder at. We know that this is that people's expectations are greater, and rightly so, about how we engage with them. So it's something that we have really tried to focus on in the last 12 months. We've done a lot more around engagement surveys, and we've focused on specific themes that we're picking up from people that they want us to focus on. And we've been talking to the corporate leadership team only in the last couple of weeks about how we will be undertaking a full benchmarked employee survey at some point later this year. So that's a piece of work that we'll be working on over the next few months, which I think will hopefully give us some much more valid and useful insights and data. Around health and safety, you'll see a snapshot of the activity there. I think the main thing I just want to draw people's attention to is that we're now spending about 25% of our time on training delivery across the health and safety team, which is great because it means people are actually engaging with it in a way I think perhaps they haven't done before. And I think really positively, since Stephen's arrival, we now have a monthly update on health and safety and employee wellbeing on the corporate leadership team agenda, which is putting a real spotlight on that in a way that that hasn't previously happened, and I think has really sharpened the focus on how important that is. So that's been a really positive message. With regards to L&D, the numbers always stagger me when I read them, but we've during the last, between April and December, so not even a full year, we had 4,863 course places taken up by people across the organisation, and over 11,000 individual e-learning modules undertaken, which is really, really positive, and we're always seeking to increase that. And we had a new system that was introduced in April 2022 called Our Development, which is our own learning management system, which hosts all our e-learning and gives us the flexibility to create much more of our own learning content, which makes it more bespoke and also more cost effective, which is always a good thing. So a lot of work going on around L&D. You'll see we have our own coaching offer as well, and we've just continuously building the learning content that as we go through the year. There is also 7.11 sets out the current position with regard to apprenticeships, and states there that we've seen a steady increase in the number of our apprentices, currently just over 200, so 203, which is fantastic. And we're already starting to think about, we might soon start to be in a position where the demand for apprenticeships outgrows the funds that we have available, which would be a great position to be in many ways, but we're starting to think about how we might cope with that. Also, recently we had our apprenticeship awards, literally only a couple of weeks ago in this room, which looked very different to it does today. It was a fantastic event, celebrating the apprenticeship awards for Cambridgeshire, which was organised, managed by the Cambridgeshire L&D team. And also you'll see there in 7.2, our first cohort of social work apprentices are due to qualify in the spring, and I believe that's 7 social workers who will be we've grown of our own, and we're looking to hopefully double that number for this year, the intake for this year. So lots of positive development there. The other area that I was just going to draw attention to is equality, diversity and inclusion. For the first time now, we have our own in-house corporate EDI team, I should say, not for the first time, but for the first time in a long time. So we have, again, through restructuring the resources that we had within the HR services area, we've created a very small, perfectly formed team of just over a headcount, just over 2 people who are focused on developing our work around EDI across the organisation. So we have a very clear action plan, and we work very closely with the Ideal Network, staff network, on the activity around that. I think you will also see in here, many of you I'm sure will be aware in 9.4 that we actually signed the Unison Anti-Racism Charter in May last year, which committed us to a range of pledges that we are working on, again, alongside colleagues in the IDOL network and our trade union colleagues. We report quarterly to them on our activity and progress against those pledges. We've introduced equality impact assessments and a network of super users to try and improve our activity around an understanding around equality impact assessments to support all of our policy changes. And indeed, there is some we're working with taking that a step further now and looking at integrated assessments and how we can introduce health and carbon assessments alongside equalities. So hopefully that's something that will be delivered this year with an integrated impact assessment tool, which will be a much more comprehensive way of assessing all the impacts across any areas of activity that we're thinking of implementing. And then one of the things that we've been working on for a while now, but is about to launch in March, is our new EDI learning, which has been informed by, we had some we commissioned some external expertise to help us with the content of that, but has been then written and produced in-house so that we can keep it fresh and updated. But that will be a suite of mandatory EDI learning that will start being rolled out in the next few weeks, which has 4 introductory models, but also will build on a compassionate and inclusive leadership model that we rolled out with the corporate leadership team last year. So lots of activity around EDI, and you'll also see our EDI strategy for 2023 to 27 coming forward to full council in May before being launched later this year. Last point is around wellbeing, and I think this is an absolutely crucial part of our activity within the HR service now, and a really crucial part of our offer to both our existing and new colleagues. We've had some really positive feedback around the wellbeing offer that we now provide. And if you haven't previously had an opportunity to have a look at that on CamWeb, but I would encourage you to do it, because there will be resources there that I'm sure will be useful to yourselves as well. But also I think it'd be useful for you to see what we do offer, as well as all the monthly wellbeing hours, which go down incredibly well. And we regularly have more than 300 people every month on those. We've also been doing a lot of partnership working with colleagues across the integrated care system, and being able to tap into sources of support for our colleagues, particularly in social care and public health, that we wouldn't have been able to access independently, not without significant cost anyway. So that's been really productive. And we are looking at our strategic approach to wellbeing so that we can bring that back and update you on how that will develop and roll out over the next few years as well, support the new people strategy. We've already covered some of the work on the people strategy earlier, so I won't rehearse that again. But as Lindsay mentioned earlier, that strategy is being reviewed at the moment, is under design at the moment, and will be coming to full council in May. And it's really based on an intent to deliver a compassionate, inclusive, and much more personal-centred approach across the organisation for all of us. So that's a whistle-stop tour really around what we've been doing, what we will be focusing on in the next period of time. Thanks.
Thank you very much. A lot going on.
Yeah.
Mac.
You let me comment, Chair? Right. Can I thank through your chair? Thank Janet for a very comprehensive report, and really grateful for it. The only comment I'd want to make, there is much of it addresses, if you like, retention, make sure we're a good organisation to work for. But I'd like to go back to the recruitment. One of the bees in my bonnet that I frequently bring up at highways in particular is the problem we have in recruiting staff, and notwithstanding the response you generally get, well, it's happening all over the country, everybody's feeling, and that happens just about in any area of employment. But one of the things I've asked, is it possible for us to benchmark how we compare with other authorities? I'm particularly thinking highway authorities. So pre-pandemic, when I was more active in as a peer reviewer and going around different highway authorities, we used to be able to pick up obviously how people felt about their organisation as opposed to the one that we as elected members came from if we're on part of the peer groups. And often, of course, you'll get those who think you're a good employer and ours is not, and the other way around. But I just wondered if you're going to recruit people, we have to be the best of the best as far as I'm concerned, ideally. And I would like to, Steve, if it's possible, to somehow benchmark it such a way as to say what packages we offer. So if you were able to compare it to like posts, how do we compare salary-wise, relocation packages, or whatever it is, to make ourselves more attractive? And say, just to be told, well, it's across the industry. And I know that there are other areas where some people find it much more attractive than to come to Cambridgeshire. You take the point, but I'm not sure if that's come through to HR, but that's certainly something I've asked Sue Proctor to look at. But do you actually do anything in that way for recruitment?
Okay, so benchmarking is an interesting and topical one because Stephen's been asking me the very same thing very recently, and Lindsay and I have been looking at various options about that where we can get some where we can engage with benchmarking forums, if you like. I think that's probably not the right word, but so we can do just that. So we absolutely will be doing that. But I think what we are doing in a less structured and across the board way is where we've got particular issues with recruiting, such as you've described, we can find that information, and we do our due diligence and do some research to find out what other people are offering. But I think you've hit the nail on the head that we have to be the best that we can be, and we have to offer we have to be the most attractive employer in the region. So that's what we're striving for. And one of the things that we've been looking at doing recently is improving our improving the lens into the organisation, if you like. So if somebody thinks about working for Cambridgeshire, when they come onto our jobs portal and have a look at what's on offer, what we've got, the information that's on there now is a lot better than it used to be. It presents a picture of the range of options that we have, but we're working on that. So, for instance, we've put a video on there from Stephen encouraging people to apply, and we've put more information on the benefits, because it's about selling ourselves. So that if people have a choice, they can see the benefits of coming to Cambridgeshire, what we can offer in terms of development opportunities when they get here. Because for a lot of people, it's not just about the money, as we know, it's about a much broader range of things that they might be able to tap into. So sorry, that's a bit of a long-winded answer to say we are looking at the benchmarking, but also we are looking, so I'd be very happy to talk to Sue. She's probably talking to people in my team already about how we can do that. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I've got Stephen, then Lucy.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, just reflecting on the content of the report, so not a question. It was more just the opportunity to say that whilst I appreciate this committee spends time listening to Janet and her team, and in the workshop session prior to today's committee, a lot of the work the teams do is very internally focused within our organisation. So many of our members don't necessarily see what they do. I think Janet's described the report before the committee today as a snapshot. I think that is the best way of describing it. If you could have included the kitchen sink in there, I'm sure they would have done. I hasten to add, the team work exceptionally hard, or all of the teams within HR services work exceptionally hard, and they actually do an exceptionally good job for this council. I am, of course, as some members know, slightly biased in that space because I may have a background with both HR and indeed many of the people still in our HR service. But I just wanted to use the opportunity, Chair, to say that Janet personally has provided me with a huge amount of support since joining the council. And I also wanted to compliment the work that Lindsay, Caroline, Kerry, Stuart, Faye, and the respective teams they lead within HR are doing for us, whether it's health and safety, it's equality, diversity and inclusion, learning and development, or HR. Actually, they are all helping enable this council to be better and tackle some of those fundamental challenges, whether it's recruitment and retention or development of our staff. So it was a chance for me to say that publicly, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Lucy.
Thank you. I think my comments follow on quite neatly because I wanted to say what a brilliant report I think this is. And I wanted to start by saying how much I really appreciate the graphic at the beginning of it, which I think is a fabulous way of presenting a very large amount of data very quickly. So thank you for that, and more of that in reports, please. That would be fab. So it's just coming back to the content a little bit. There are lots and lots of really interesting, useful things for us to look at in there. A couple of the things that I wanted to highlight. So first of all, fantastic news about the apprenticeships. I've been going on for a while about how absolutely crucial it is that we have more apprenticeships, and it's really fabulous to see now just how many we have, and looking at the information in there about our social work apprentices and how many of them are staying, how crucial that is for our organisation, because we know that that's a really difficult group of people to recruit into. And if we can train our own staff, that's fabulous for us and for them, I hope. In a minute, I'll come on to keeping them. So that's really, really good news. I wouldn't want us to think that because we had spent our levy, we should stop having apprenticeships. So it would be good to know that that's not the way we're thinking. And I think there are mechanisms within the levy legislation that allow people from other organisations to passport their levy to neighbouring organisations who they feel can help them. So I think it would be interesting for us to talk to many of the organisations that we work with about whether they're using their full levy, and if they're not, whether or not we can support them by training people that will then be useful to them. And I don't know which organisations that might be, but schools are one of them that it might be worth thinking about, because actually that social work resource is very much important for them. Anyway, there are quite a number of partners who might be worth talking to. So the other side of that particular staffing piece is retention, which I think is absolutely critical. And I'm very glad to hear that you've got a bit more focus on that and you are doing more exit interviews. I think by the time you get to an exit interview, it's often too late. And I think we need to be making sure that we are talking to our staff about how they feel about the organisation and how they feel about their roles earlier, and making sure that we are being as responsive as we can be, and very much encouraging people, if they feel that they're struggling, to come and talk to somebody, so that we don't find that people are just leaving, because actually nearly always the people we're losing are people not always, there are occasions when there are people who we're losing who are in the wrong role, but quite often it's people who we ought to be able to support to stay, and we need to be making sure that we're working very hard to do that. So it's really good to see the progress, and I know you will be taking all that on board and carrying on with that, because we had a conversation about that earlier as well. So those were my main points. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Meg.
If you don't mind me coming back, actually, Lucy raises an interesting point. It's a memory thing for me. And I don't know whether this has changed over the years since I was gainfully employed. But I used to work for one of the largest aerospace companies in the country. And one of the problems we had with apprentices, both graduate apprentices and non-graduate apprentices, was that point where they finish their apprenticeship and they want to become full-time employees, if you like. And the pay offer, because it was such a quantum leap in their sense to what they actually were, they were poached, because we weren't able to offer them significant. And I just wonder whether that's an issue. So when you're doing, for instance, exit interviews, that is often a factor. I've done my apprenticeship, I've worked with a good company, but the pay is not sufficient. We're next door, happy to pay me, because as far as they're concerned, I'm now a fully qualified engineer. Is that an issue which is still apparent? And are we finding it here? How do you address it?
So that's not presented as an issue for us, and that's because the apprenticeship rules and the way we pay apprentices has changed significantly, thankfully. And very often that a lot of the apprenticeships that we've got are people who are in roles already within the organisation, and they're taking on an apprenticeship while they're so they still get paid the right salary for the job, if you like. So the days of when people were on a very low apprenticeship rate, we've moved on from there. So thankfully, and actually, I think what we find is as we're working with the apprentices, Kerry's team and the learning and development team, there is always one eye on how these people are going to move. If they do need to move into another role at the end of it, what does that look like? And we absolutely want to invest in people, but we want to invest in them hopefully to stay within the organisation. They might move to another team, that's fine, but we want to retain people within the organisation as much as we can. So we are looking at the future, progression for them, so that doesn't happen. Yeah.
It's a very interesting point though, because I think that most of our apprentices so far have been in the social work area, and we are moving into civil engineering. Is that right? And that therefore, I mean, there is a potential that there might be slightly different outcomes. But anyway, it's just something we need to keep looking.
They're actually across the whole organisation. So really, we are. You're absolutely right on the highways point, because I think we've just had agreement to actually go out and recruit. I think quite a number. Is it 7 or 8 or something like that? 8 apprentices for that area. But they are across, and you'd be surprised. I think I could. In fact, I will send you some information on who across the organisation our apprentices are and in what roles, because I think you'd be pleasantly surprised. Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you. That would be really interesting. Are there any other comments or questions? Elisa.
Sorry, this is really silly. I don't want to ask this until we've finished with this item, given that it's the last one on the agenda. I have a question for Michelle. Hello, Michelle. Sorry. As a newish member of this committee, I was wondering if it was normal for this committee not to have an agenda plan at the end, because that's what normally happens with the others, but am I not correct?
We don't have an agenda plan, and we also in the diary of meetings don't actually have any meetings listed for staffing and appeals. The meeting that you have today is actually the most, what I would say, consistent with our other types of meetings, the types of items that you're considering. We know that this is going to happen at this time every year, but most of the time we're reactive to when you're actually recruiting people. And so meetings will be arranged as and when needed.
Basically, this is like an annual meeting in some respects. That's very interesting. No, I was just wondering in terms of what other sort of things, because quite a lot of the stuff that we've talked about today makes me think, it would be worth a follow-up in less than a year, but maybe that's not how this committee works. But it was very, 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 very useful. So thank you, and sorry for the slight ignorance.
Thank you. No, that's a really good suggestion, that if we do have another opportunity to meet, which I'm sure we will, that we can take the opportunity to review progress against some of these things. As you've suggested, that's a very good idea. Any other comments? No, we're asked to note this report. I'm sure we all note it. Thank you. Thank you very much. Noted, and thank you very much. A fabulous report. And that concludes matters for today. Thank you very much indeed.